The last thing my only child ever said to me was, "Don't you dare come to the funeral." But when the lawyer opened my mother's will, she was the one who cried. I'm telling you this story because if you've ever been betrayed by someone you thought would love you forever, you need to know that the deepest cuts come from the sharpest knives we handed them ourselves. And you need to know that silence isn't peace, it's just the quiet before you find your voice. Stick with me. My name is Evelyn, and this is the story of how I lost everything, only to find a version of myself I never knew I had the strength to meet. I've always believed that a life is built not on the big, dramatic moments, but on the small, quiet ones. The ones you don't even think to photograph. The smell of coffee brewing in my sun-drenched kitchen at 6:30 a.m., the view from my bay window of the old maple tree my husband Robert and I planted the day we moved into this house 35 years ago, the sound of his steady breathing beside me, a rhythm so familiar it was its own kind of silence. Our life here, in this quiet Connecticut suburb, was a tapestry woven from threads of comfortable routine and earned contentment. Robert had retired 2 years prior from his architecture firm, and I filled my days tending to my extensive garden, volunteering at the local library, and having weekly lunches with my mother. And then there was Chloe, our daughter, our universe. Chloe was light. She had Robert's easy smile and my stubborn streak, a combination that made her both fiercely loving and fiercely independent. I remember her at 7, covered in mud, presenting me with a wriggling earthworm like it was a diamond. I remember her at 16, eyes blazing with teenage indignation because we wouldn't let her borrow the car for some concert in the city. I remember her wedding day, her hand trembling in mine as we walked down the aisle toward Mark, who looked at her like she'd hung the moon. "I got so lucky, Mom," she'd whispered to me, her voice thick with emotion. "He's my forever." I squeezed her hand, my heart so full it ached. "No, sweetheart," I'd said. "He's the lucky one." That was the memory I clung to, the one I replayed in my mind like a favorite film reel. It was getting harder to reconcile that girl with the woman she'd become. The success she and Mark found with their tech startup had changed things. The money came in fast and dizzying amounts. They bought a monstrously modern glass and steel house that looked down on the rest of the town from a hill, a house that felt more like a museum than a home. There were new friends, vacations and places I had to look up on a map, a constant, low hum of urgency to their lives that I could never quite sync with. But she was still my Chloe. She still called every Sunday. She still came over for dinner every other week, though the conversations had shifted. They were less about her life and more about mine, my plans, or, more specifically, my lack of them. It was during one of these dinners, a chilly Tuesday in October, that the first crack appeared. A hairline fracture so fine I almost missed it. Robert had grilled steaks, and the smell of charred meat and autumn leaves filled the air. We were around our familiar oak table, the one covered in a galaxy of nicks and scratches from a lifetime of use. "This is delicious, Dad," Chloe said, taking a sip of her wine. She turned to me. "So, Mom, I was thinking, the house." I smiled, cutting into my potato. "What about it? Finally approve of my color choice for the guest bathroom?" I'd painted it a seafoam green she'd deemed aggressively coastal. She didn't smile back. "No, not the bathroom. The house itself. It's a lot for you and Dad to manage, isn't it? The yard is huge. Those stairs to the second floor are getting steeper." Robert chuckled. "I'll have you know I just oiled those banisters. They're in better shape than I am." "I'm serious," she said, her voice losing its casual tone. Mark stayed quiet, intently studying the pattern on his fork. "You're not getting any younger. What's the long-term plan here? This place is a beast to maintain, and it's just the two of you in 4 bedrooms. A small, cold knot formed in my stomach. "It's our home, Chloe. We've raised a family here. We're not just gonna discard it because the lawn needs mowing." "It's not discarding," she said, her voice taking on a patient, explaining tone that set my teeth on edge. "It's downsizing, being practical. There's a fantastic new senior living community being built over in Ridgefield. State-of-the-art, fitness centers, meal plans, on-site medical. It's like a permanent cruise ship." I stared at her, my fork hovering midair. "A cruise ship? Chloe, I'm 62. I garden. I play tennis twice a week. I'm not ready for community with On-site medical. Your father and I are perfectly capable. For now, she said softly, and those 2 words landed like a physical blow. But what about in 5 years? 10? You need to be proactive about these things. We could get a great price for this place. The market is hot. That money, invested properly, could set you up for life. This house is just a thing. It's an asset. It's not an asset, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. It's our home. It's where you grew up. It's where we had your birthday parties and built blanket forts and nursed you through the flu. You don't just sell that. She sighed, a sound of profound exasperation, as if I were a child refusing to eat my vegetables. You're being sentimental, Mom. Emotion is the worst possible lens through which to view a financial decision. Right, Mark? Mark finally looked up, his gaze shifting between his wife and me. He offered a weak, non-committal smile. There are pros and cons to every scenario. It was a coward's answer, and we all knew it. The rest of the dinner passed in a strained politeness. She kissed our cheeks goodbye, her perfume, something expensive and floral, lingering in the air long after they'd driven off in their silent electric car. Robert put an arm around me as we cleared the plates. Don't let it get to you, Evie. She's just worried about us. She shows it in a unique way. She talked about our home like it was a stock she wanted to divest, I whispered, the hurt finally leaking into my voice. I know, he said, pulling me closer. But she's our girl. She doesn't mean it like that. I wanted to believe him. I desperately wanted to believe that the daughter I raised, the girl who cried when her goldfish died, was still in there somewhere, beneath the designer clothes and the talk of assets and portfolios. That night, lying in bed, I replayed the conversation. You're being sentimental. It's just a thing. The words felt like little splinters working their way under my skin. It was the first time I felt a chill in my own home, a draft that had nothing to do with the autumn wind outside. The weeks that followed were a masterclass in passive aggression. Chloe's Sunday calls became less about catching up and more about gently, persistently probing. She'd send me links to articles about right-sizing your life and the financial benefits of liquidating real estate assets in a high-market environment. She'd casually mention friends whose parents had made the smart move into assisted living and were thriving without the burden of property maintenance. I began to dread the ring of my phone. Each conversation was a tiny erosion of my spirit. I started to question myself. Was I being foolish? Was I clinging to a past that was holding us back? Robert remained my rock, steadfastly dismissing her concerns. Tell her we've got it handled, Evie, he'd say, his voice calm and sure. Our finances are in order. The house is paid off. We're healthy. We're not going anywhere. But the pressure was constant, a low-grade fever of anxiety that I couldn't shake. The normalcy of my life, the gardening, the library, the lunches with Mom, felt different now, like I was performing a part in a play whose run was about to end. I found myself looking at the nicks in the dining table, the faint crayon mark on the doorframe where a young Chloe had decided to experiment, the perennial bed I'd nurtured for decades, with a new, aching poignancy. Was it all just clutter? Was I? The escalation was subtle at first, then breathtakingly cruel. It started with my mother. At 85, Eleanor was sharp as a tack, but her body was beginning to fail her. Her arthritis was worse, making it difficult for her to get around her cozy little cottage. Our weekly lunches moved from her kitchen to mine. Chloe started joining us. At first, I was delighted. 3 generations of women, sharing a meal. I'd make my mother's favorite chicken pot pie, the recipe handed down from my own grandmother. The air would be filled with the comforting smells of thyme and pastry, and for a little while, it felt like old times. But Chloe had an agenda. She'd steer the conversation, every time, toward the future. Nana, she'd say, leaning forward with a concerned expression, this cottage is adorable, but all those steps? What if you fall? You should really think about something more manageable. My mother, a woman of immense grace and quiet strength, would just pat Chloe's hand. I've been navigating those steps for 40 years, dear. I think I've got the hang of it. But it's not safe, Chloe would insist, her voice dripping with faux concern. I worry about you all alone out here. We all do. She'd include me in this, we, a silent assumption of an alliance that didn't exist. The real blow came the Tuesday after Thanksgiving. The holiday itself had been a strained affair at Chloe and Mark's sterile mansion. The conversation had been dominated by their recent trip to Dubai, the impressive returns on their investment portfolio. Robert and I felt like relics, spectators to a life we didn't understand. We'd left early, pleading a headache, which wasn't entirely a lie. The following Tuesday, Mom was feeling poorly, so I drove to her place with a container of homemade soup. As I pulled up, I saw another car in the driveway. Chloe's silver BMW. My heart did a little leap of confused joy. She'd come to check on her grandmother. Maybe there was hope. I let myself in with my key. The house was quiet. I could hear murmured voices from the sunroom at the back. I walked softly down the hall, the old floorboards creaking under my weight. They hadn't heard me come in. I stopped just outside the sunroom door. Their voices were clear now. "You have to see it from my perspective, Nana," Chloe was saying. "It's a massive responsibility. I have a company to run, a life. I can't be worrying every second that you've taken a bad fall, or that Mom is over here, exhausting herself trying to take care of you." "Evelyn never complains," my mother said, her voice thin but firm. "She loves our Tuesdays." "I know she does," Chloe said, and I could hear the dismissive wave of her hand in her tone. "But it's not sustainable. And let's be honest. Your faculties are, well, they're not what they were. You're forgetting things. You need professional care. The place I'm looking at for Mom and Dad has a wonderful memory care wing. You could be close to them. It's the perfect solution." I felt the world tilt. A memory care wing? My mother's mind was the sharpest thing about her. She did the New York Times crossword in pen every morning. This was a monstrous fiction. But then my mother said something that stole the breath from my lungs. "Chloe, darling, I appreciate your concern. I do. But this is my home. My things are here, my memories. Evelyn understands that." Chloe's laugh was a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Mom understands sentimentality, not sense. She's emotionally driven, always has been. That's why she and Dad have barely anything saved for retirement. They spent everything on that big, empty house and on me, I suppose. They never planned for the future. Someone has to be the adult here and make the hard decisions. If that falls to me, so be it." I stood there, frozen, the container of soup growing cold in my hands. Emotionally driven, barely anything saved. Someone has to be the adult. The words were knives, expertly aimed. She wasn't just trying to manage our lives. She was pitying us. She saw us as foolish, incompetent children. The betrayal was so profound, so intimate, it felt like a physical violation. I backed away silently, not wanting them to know I'd heard. I got back in my car and drove away, the soup forgotten on the passenger seat. I cried the whole way home, heaving sobs of pure, undiluted hurt. When I told Robert what I'd overheard, his face went pale, then hardened into an expression of grim anger I'd never seen before. "That's enough," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "That is more than enough." He called Chloe immediately. I listened from the kitchen, my body trembling. "Chloe," he said, his tone lethally calm. "Your mother told me about your conversation with Eleanor today." I heard the tinny, frantic sound of her voice on the other end, but couldn't make out the words. Robert cut through it. "I don't care what your intentions were. What you said was disrespectful, cruel, and factually incorrect. Our financial situation is none of your concern. Your grandmother's health is none of your concern. You will stop this campaign immediately. Do you understand me?" There was more frantic buzzing from the phone. Robert's jaw tightened. "I don't care if you were, just worried. Worry is sending a fruit basket. What you're doing is something else entirely. You will apologize to your mother and your grandmother." He listened for another moment. Then his eyes widened in disbelief. "What did you just say to me?" He was silent for a long time, just listening, the color draining from his face. Finally, he spoke. His voice, quiet and shaking, with a fury I knew he was barely containing. "If that's how you feel, then perhaps a little distance is exactly what we all need." He ended the call and slammed the phone down on the counter so hard I jumped. "What?" I asked, my voice small. "What did she say?" He turned to me, his eyes haunted. She said, we were being selfish. That our stubborn refusal to face reality was putting an unfair burden on her. That she has a company to run and a reputation to maintain, and the last thing she needs is to be dealing with her elderly parents. Self-inflicted crises. The room swam. It was worse than I could have imagined. Our love, our care, our entire life together was now a self-inflicted crisis and an unfair burden. The distance Chloe asked for became a chasm. The phone calls stopped, the dinners ended. She didn't come by for Christmas. The holiday was a quiet, hollow affair, just me, Robert, and my mother, trying desperately to ignore the gaping Chloe-shaped hole in the room. The only communication was a text on Christmas morning. "Merry Christmas. Hope you're well." It was so sterile, so devoid of feeling, it was worse than no message at all. The gossip started in January. I'd be at the grocery store and notice an old friend quickly look away. I'd be at the library, and a conversation would suddenly hush as I approached. At first, I thought I was being paranoid. But then my closest friend, Sarah, finally took me aside after our book club one evening. "Evelyn," she said gently, steering me toward a quiet corner, "I have to ask, is everything okay with you and Robert?" "Of course," I said, too quickly. "Why wouldn't it be?" She looked uncomfortable. "It's just, there are rumors. Chloe was at the clubhouse last week having lunch with some of her new crowd. She was talking quite loudly. She seemed very upset." A cold dread washed over me. "What kind of rumors, Sarah?" She took a deep breath. "She said you were both refusing to plan for the future, that Robert's mind was slipping, that he was making poor financial decisions, and you were enabling him. She said she was at her wit's end, trying to get you to see reason, to move into a place where you could get help, but you were both being belligerent and accusatory. She said it was breaking her heart." I felt the floor drop out from under me. Not only was she orchestrating our lives, she was rewriting our story for a public audience. She was painting us as senile, difficult, and herself as the long-suffering, concerned daughter. It was a brilliant, vicious piece of propaganda. My hands started to shake. "None of that is true, Sarah. Not a word of it. Robert is sharp as ever. Our finances are fine. She wants us to sell the house. She wants to put my mother in a home. We said no, and this is her retaliation." Sarah's face softened with pity. "Oh, Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I knew it couldn't be true. But you know how people talk. It's a juicy story. The mighty Chloe, the town's golden girl, brought low by her difficult parents." She squeezed my arm. "I'll set the record straight where I can." But the damage was done. The rumor, once released, had a life of its own. I felt eyes on me everywhere I went. Whispers followed me down the aisles of the supermarket. The humiliation was a constant, sickening ache in my stomach. We were being socially isolated, our reputation systematically dismantled by our own daughter. The betrayal was no longer a private family matter. It was a public spectacle. Just when I thought the humiliation couldn't get any deeper, Chloe performed an Oscar-worthy act of manipulation. She showed up on our doorstep one Sunday in February, unannounced. She was holding a large bakery box and wearing a contrite expression that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Mom." "Dad," she said, her voice a practiced tremble. "Can I please come in? I need to talk to you. I'm so sorry." My instinct was to slam the door. Robert's hand on my shoulder held me back. He gave me a warning look. "Hear her out." We let her in. She went through a breathtaking performance of apology. She cried. Real tears. I'll give her that. She said the stress of her business had been overwhelming. She said she'd taken her frustrations out on us, the people she loved most. She said she'd been horrible, and she missed us. And she couldn't bear this estrangement. "I just want my family back," she sobbed, and for a glorious, foolish moment, I believed her. My mother's heart, so desperate for reconciliation, overrode all the evidence of the past few months. Robert, ever the peacemaker, softened. We had coffee and pastries. We talked. She was charming, funny, the old Chloe peeking through. She carefully avoided any mention of houses or retirement communities or finances. It was a masterclass in love bombing. And I fell for it. God help me, I fell for it. I wanted so badly to believe my daughter was back that I willingly closed my eyes to the calculation in hers. This was the deepening of the bond, the strengthening of the trust she needed to manipulate before she made her final move. She started visiting more often. She'd bring over dinner. She'd ask Robert for advice on home repair projects, playing to his desire to feel needed. She was reeling us back in, and we went willingly, desperate for the affection we'd been starved of. The stakes escalated dramatically a month later, on a bright, cold morning in March. My mother had a fall. It wasn't serious. She'd slipped on a throw rug and bruised her hip, but it was frightening. I called an ambulance and met her at the hospital. Of course, I called Chloe. She and Mark arrived within 20 minutes, a whirlwind of efficient concern. Chloe took charge, speaking with doctors, filling out forms. I was huddled in a plastic waiting room chair, clutching a styrofoam cup of terrible coffee, shaking with adrenaline and fear. I was so grateful for her presence. In that moment, she was my rock. Once Mom was settled in a room, sedated and resting comfortably, Chloe sat down next to me. She took my hand. Her skin was cool. "Mom, this is exactly what I was afraid of," she said, her voice low and earnest. "What if you hadn't been there? What if she'd been alone for days? This can't happen again." "I know," I said, my voice trembling. "I'll check on her more often. I'll get her one of those medical alert necklaces." "That's a Band-Aid," Chloe said, shaking her head. "It's not a solution. Look, I have a proposal. A way to make sure Nana is always safe, and to ease the financial burden on you and Dad. A way we can put this all behind us and just be a family again." I looked at her, weary and vulnerable. "What proposal?" "Sign over power of attorney to me," she said, her tone utterly reasonable. "For both of you, and for Nana. Let me handle the bills, the taxes, the medical decisions. It would take so much stress off your plates. You could just enjoy your retirement. You could focus on gardening and reading, not worrying about property tax deadlines or insurance forms. I can manage it all. It's what I'm good at." It sounded so logical, so loving. In my drained and frightened state, the idea of handing over all those tedious, anxiety-inducing responsibilities was incredibly seductive. To just be free. To have my daughter take care of everything. I don't know, Chloe," I said hesitantly. "That's a big step. I'd have to talk to your father." "Of course," she said smoothly, squeezing my hand. "Talk to Dad. But please, just think about it. Think about how much easier life could be. For all of us." I did talk to Robert. He was immediately, instinctively against it. "Absolutely not," he said, his voice firm. "Our affairs are our own. We are not handing control of our lives over to our daughter, no matter how helpful she claims to be." Chloe was patient. She didn't push. She just kept being the perfect, attentive daughter. She'd bring over paperwork, showing us how complicated our own finances were, subtly highlighting areas where she thought we'd made errors. She'd talk about the peace of mind it would bring her to know we were safe and secure. She played on my guilt, on my desire to make things right with her. The pressure was immense, a constant, gentle, relentless tide wearing away at our resolve. The shift, the moment I realized the betrayal, was far darker and more calculated than I'd ever imagined. Happened on a Tuesday, my mother's Tuesday. She was back home, moving slowly but with her spirit intact. I was helping her sort through some old papers. Bank statements, insurance documents, getting things in order, partly to prove to Chloe that we were capable, and partly because Chloe's campaign had made me paranoid. I found a letter from her bank, dated from the previous autumn. It was a notice of a change of address on her account. Her statements were now being sent to a P.O. box. A P.O. box I didn't recognize. A cold finger of dread traced down my spine. "Mom?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "Did you get a P.O. box? The bank has a new address for you." She frowned, adjusting her glasses. "A P.O. box? No, dear. Why would I do that? I've had the same address for 40 years. They must have made a mistake." The cold feeling intensified. "Did you maybe ask Chloe to handle something for you? With the bank?" "Oh, well, yes," she said, brightening. "She was such a dear." A few months ago, she said she noticed I was getting confused with all the paper statements, that it was a security risk. She offered to set up something called paperless billing for me. She said it would be safer and less clutter. She took all my information to the bank to get it all set up. Such a good girl looking out for me. The room seemed to tilt. Paperless billing didn't require a P.O. box. A P.O. box was for receiving paper mail. Quietly, without my mother's full understanding, Chloe had redirected her financial statements. She had cut off my mother's access to her own financial paper trail. This wasn't help. This was isolation. This was a takeover. The loving, helpful daughter act was a lie. It was all a lie. The realization was a physical sickness, a rolling wave of nausea and dizzying horror. I had to get out of there. I made an excuse, telling Mom I'd forgotten something in the oven, and I practically ran to my car. I drove home in a blind panic, my mind racing. If she'd done this to my mother, what had she done to us? The second I got home, I went to our filing cabinet, my hands shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I pulled out the files for our bank accounts, our investment statements, the deed to the house. Everything looked normal at first glance. But then I looked closer. At the bottom of our most recent mortgage statements, for a house that had been paid off for 10 years, was a line item I didn't recognize. A fee for an account management service. I pulled out the previous statement. It wasn't there. I grabbed the phone and called the bank, navigating the automated hellscape until I finally reached a human being. "I'm looking at my mortgage statement," I said, my voice trembling. "There's a fee here for account management. Can you tell me what that is?" The woman on the other end was polite and efficient. "Let me check for you, ma'am. Yes, I see that. That's a fee for the new premium account management service you signed up for last month. It includes—" "I didn't sign up for anything," I interrupted, my heart hammering against my ribs. "It shows here the service was added on February 14th, she said. A phone authorization." February 14th, Valentine's Day. The day Chloe had brought us a fancy dinner and professed her love and regret. The day she'd helped me sort through a pile of mail, saying she'd call about a few questionable charges to save me the hassle. "Who authorized it?" I asked, my mouth dry as dust. "The authorization was given by a Chloe Evans," the woman said cheerfully. "She's listed as a full authorized user on the account. She has been since January." The phone slipped from my hand and clattered on the floor. I stood there, in the middle of my quiet, sunny kitchen, and the world I thought I knew shattered into a million jagged pieces. She wasn't just offering advice. She wasn't just being pushy. She had systematically, and without our knowledge or consent, inserted herself into our financial lives. She had gained control. The isolation I felt in that moment was absolute and terrifying. I was alone in a way I had never been before. The person I was supposed to trust most in this world had become a predator, and I was her prey. I didn't know who to turn to. Who would believe me? The town thought we were going senile. Our daughter was the successful, beloved golden child. We were the difficult, aging parents. If I went to the police, it would be her word against mine, and her word was currently worth a lot more in this town than mine. I felt utterly, completely abandoned. The walls of my beautiful home, the home she wanted so badly to sell, felt like they were closing in on me. I was a prisoner in my own life, and my jailer was my only child. I had to know how deep this went. I waited for Robert to get home from his weekly round of golf. I showed him the mortgage statement. I told him about my mother's P.O. box. I watched the color drain from his face, watched the same horrific realization dawn in his eyes. The father, who had always fixed everything, looked utterly broken. "My God," he whispered, sinking into a kitchen chair. "What has she done?" We spent the next week in a state of silent, frantic investigation. We were detectives in our own lives. We went to the county clerk's office. We pulled every document associated with our names. And that's when we found discovery number 1. The first shocking proof. It was a quitclaim deed, dated just 3 weeks prior. It had our signatures, notarized, transferring the title of our house from Robert and Evelyn Evans to Robert and Evelyn Evans, with rights of survivorship to Chloe Evans. I stared at the document, my blood running cold. The signatures were good forgeries. Very good, but they were forgeries. We had never signed this. We would never sign this. It meant that if anything happened to Robert, the house would belong to me and Chloe jointly. And if anything happened to both of us, it would be hers. Outright, bypassing any will. She had laid the groundwork to steal our home out from under us. "We need a lawyer," Robert said, his voice a hollow shell of itself. "A shark. Not anyone local. Someone she can't touch." We found one in Hartford. His name was Arthur Brinkley, and he was expensive, ruthless, and specialized in financial elder abuse and estate fraud. We sat in his sleek, modern office and laid out the entire sordid story. We showed him the quitclaim deed. He listened, took notes, his expression grim. "This is, unfortunately, common," he said, steepling his fingers. "The first thing we need to do is lock everything down. We'll revoke all her authorizations. We'll file a fraud report on the deed. But, quote," he said, fixing us with a serious look, "this is just the tip of the iceberg. If she's gone this far, she's gone further. We need to dig, and you need to be prepared for what we might find." The digging was excruciating. It was like performing an autopsy on our own relationship with our daughter. Every discovery was a fresh wound. Brinkley's forensic accountant found she had taken out 2 lines of credit against our house. She had funneled money from our investment accounts into shell corporations that traced back to her business partner, Mark. She had been slowly, methodically bleeding us dry for months. The final, crushing blow came from my mother's lawyer. After my discovery of the P.O. box, we'd had him investigate. He called us into his dusty, book-lined office. His face was ashen. "Evelyn, Robert," he said gravely, "I've reviewed Eleanor's estate documents. There's a new will, filed 6 weeks ago." My heart stopped. "A new will?" He slid a document across the desk. "It revokes all previous versions. It leaves her entire estate, the cottage, her life insurance, her investments, to a single beneficiary, Chloe Evans. It names Chloe as the executor and power of attorney, effectively disinheriting you, Evelyn, entirely." I felt the world go black at the edges. My own mother. My sweet, sharp-minded mother. Chloe had disinherited me from my own mother's estate. The cruelty of it was so profound I couldn't even breathe. Robert's hand found mine, his grip tight, the only thing anchoring me to the earth. "And the worst part," the lawyer said, his voice heavy with disgust, "is the signature. It's a flawless imitation of Eleanor's. But the witnesses, I know them. They're notary publics who work extensively with Mark's commercial real estate firm. This was a professional job. Chloe hadn't just betrayed us. She had conspired to rob me of my inheritance. She had turned my own mother against me from the shadows. This was betrayer's power. This was her, gloating in the most vicious way possible, without even having to say a word. She thought she had already won. She thought we were too old, too stupid, too broken to fight back. The humiliation was a fire in my veins. But this time, it wasn't a fire of shame. It was a fire of rage. In the depths of that despair, I found a hidden strength I never knew I possessed. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was a cold, hard, diamond core of resolve that formed in the center of my soul. This would not stand. I would not be her victim. I would not let her rewrite our story with her as the hero and us as the pathetic villains. I would become the author of the final chapter. Robert and I, together, became a silent, determined army of 2. We worked closely with Arthur Brinkley, but we didn't just leave it to him. We started our own investigation. We began to quietly reach out to people, old friends who had been alienated, former employees of Mark's who had left under mysterious circumstances. We played the part of the confused, aging parents perfectly, asking innocent questions, expressing concern about Chloe's stress levels, her business, her marriage. And slowly, piece by piece, a different story emerged. We discovered that their tech startup wasn't the roaring success they'd portrayed. It was a house of cards, built on debt and risky loans. They were weeks away from a liquidity crisis. They needed a massive cash infusion. Our house, my mother's estate. That was the infusion. This wasn't just about control. It was about desperation. They were drowning, and they were trying to use our lives as a flotation device. We also found our first ally, a young woman named Isabel, who had been a junior accountant at Mark's firm. She'd been fired when she started asking too many questions about fund transfers. She was angry, and she was willing to talk. She gave us documents, spreadsheets, evidence of financial maneuvering that made Brinkley whistle in disbelief. The revenge plan was no longer just about defense. It was about offense. We bided our time. We gathered our evidence. We let Chloe believe she was winning. She continued her act, visiting, pretending to care, all while subtly pressuring us about the power of attorney. We played along, feigning hesitation, letting her think she was slowly wearing us down. It was the hardest performance of my life, to smile at the woman who was trying to destroy us, to offer her coffee and cookies while I knew the truth of her monstrous greed. The final cruelty, betrayer's power at its peak, came on a sunny afternoon in May. My mother took a sudden turn for the worse, a stroke. It was massive and devastating. She was rushed to the hospital, but there was nothing they could do. She lingered for 2 days in a coma before she slipped away. The grief was paralyzing. I lost my anchor, my best friend, my mom. In the midst of that soul-crushing pain, Chloe swooped in. She took over all the funeral arrangements. She was efficiency personified. Cold, calm, and utterly in control. Robert and I were too gutted to argue. The day after my mother passed, Chloe came to the house. She wasn't there to mourn. She was there to deliver an ultimatum. "The funeral is set for Saturday at 11, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. She handed me a printed itinerary. "I've taken care of everything." "Thank you, Chloe," I said numbly, taking the paper. "There's one more thing," she said, her eyes cold and hard. "The lawyer is reading the will on Monday. I expect you'll want to be there, but regarding the funeral, I think it's best if you don't come." I stared at her, sure I had misheard. "What?" "It's for the best, Mom," she said, her tone clinical, as if she were discussing a business merger. "You're too emotional. You'll make a scene. It's important to me that this is a dignified event. I need to focus on representing the family, and I can't do that if I'm worried about you becoming hysterical. It's what Nana would have wanted, a calm, peaceful service." The audacity of it, the breathtaking cruelty, to deny a daughter the right to say goodbye to her own mother. This was her final act of humiliation, her ultimate display of power. She was exiling me from my own mother's funeral. I didn't have the energy to fight. The grief was too heavy. I just nodded, unable to speak. A small, satisfied smile touched her lips. She thought she had broken me completely. She kissed my cheek. "I'll see you Monday at the lawyer's office." And she left. I didn't go to the funeral. I sat in my mother's garden, among her roses, and I said my own goodbye. And as I sat there, weeping, the cold, hard diamond of my resolve solidified into something unbreakable. She had given me the final gift. She had shown me the absolute bottom of her ruthlessness. There was no lower she could go. Now, there was only up. And I was going to rise, not with kindness, but with the cold, precise force of a reckoning she would never see coming. The execution of our revenge was a quiet, meticulous process. While Chloe was receiving condolences at my mother's funeral, Robert and I were in Brinkley's office, going over the final plan. We had everything. The forged deed, the fraudulent will, the bank records, Isabel's testimony, evidence of the financial troubles at their company. We had a timeline of lies, manipulation, and thefts, so detailed it was a work of horrific art. Brinkley had also done some digging of his own. He'd discovered that the notary who had witnessed the fake will had been pressured into it by Mark, who held a large debt over her husband's business. She was ready to talk. We had her. We had them all. The reading of the will was to be our battlefield. Chloe wanted a performance? We would give her one. The morning of the reading, I dressed carefully. I wore a simple black dress, my pearls, a look of subdued grief. I was an actress preparing for the role of a lifetime. Robert squeezed my hand. "Ready, Evie?" he asked, his eyes fierce. I've never been more ready, I said, my voice steady. We arrived at the lawyer's office. Chloe and Mark were already there, sitting in the large leather chairs like a king and queen, awaiting their coronation. Chloe looked up as we entered, her expression one of pitying condescension. Mom, Dad, she said, I'm glad you decided to come. I know this will be difficult, but it's important to hear Nana's final wishes. We didn't reply. We simply sat down across from them. The lawyer, Mr. Gable, my mother's longtime attorney, looked deeply uncomfortable. He cleared his throat and opened a folder. We're here to read the last will and testament of Eleanor Margaret Shaw, he began, his voice somber. This document, dated April 10th of this year, revokes all previous versions. He started to read the legalese. I didn't hear it. I was watching Chloe's face. She was trying to look sad, but I could see the avaricious gleam in her eyes, the barely concealed anticipation. She was waiting for her prize. Finally, Mr. Gable got to the disbursements. To my granddaughter, Chloe Evans, I leave my entire estate, including the property at 42 Willow Lane, all financial instruments and all personal possessions, to be hers in perpetuity. Chloe let out a soft, choked sob, a perfect performance of grateful grief. She reached for Mark's hand. Mr. Gable continued. And to my daughter, Evelyn Evans, I leave nothing. The words hung in the air. Chloe looked at me, her eyes wide with fake sympathy. Oh, Mom, she whispered. I'm so sorry. I don't know why she would do this. I truly don't. I didn't look away from her. I held her gaze, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. She had expected me to break down, to weep, to crumble. I simply smiled. A small, cold smile. It was then that the door to the office opened. Arthur Brinkley walked in, followed by two men in suits. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. What is the meaning of this? Mark said, standing up. This is a private reading. My name is Arthur Brinkley, our lawyer said, his voice booming in the quiet room. I represent Mr. and Mrs. Evans. And these gentlemen are from the state's attorney's office for financial fraud. He turned to Mr. Gable. The document you are reading is a forgery, a very good one, but a forgery nonetheless. Chloe's face went sheet white. That's a lie, she spat out, her composure cracking. How dare you? How dare you come in here and accuse me of such a thing at my grandmother's will reading? It's not an accusation, Mrs. Evans, one of the suits said calmly. It's based on a mountain of evidence, including a sworn affidavit from the notary public who witnessed this signature under duress. He looked at Mr. Gable. The valid last will and testament of Eleanor Shaw, dated 2015, leaves her entire estate to her daughter, Evelyn Evans, with a small trust established for her granddaughter, Chloe. That document has been on file with this office for nearly a decade. The execution was in motion. The confrontation I had dreamed of was unfolding with a precision more beautiful than any fantasy. This is insane, Mark shouted, his face purple with rage. You can't prove any of this. We can, actually, Brinkley said. He opened his briefcase and began laying documents on the table. Bank statements showing the unauthorized transfers. The fraudulent quitclaim deed. The forensic accountant's report tracing the money to their failing company. Isabel's sworn statement. We have evidence of fraud, forgery, identity theft, and the financial exploitation of vulnerable adults. This was a systematic, premeditated campaign to steal from your own family. Chloe was shaking her head, her eyes wild. No, they're confused, they're old. They don't understand their own finances. I was helping them. Mom, tell them I was just helping you. I finally spoke. My voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. The only thing you were helping yourself to, Chloe, was our money and our home. You betrayed us. You lied to the entire town about us. You tried to steal my inheritance from my own mother, and you had the audacity to tell me not to come to her funeral. I stood up, walking over to the table. I looked down at my daughter, at the mask of perfect daughterhood finally, completely, shattered into a million pieces, revealing the terrified, greedy stranger beneath. You said emotion was the worst lens for financial decisions, I said, my voice dripping with a cold fury I didn't know I possessed. You were right, this isn't emotional. This is just business. The business of you facing the consequences of your actions. I turned to the men from the state's attorney's office. My husband and I wish to press charges. to the fullest extent of the law. The aftermath was a whirlwind of stunning downfall. Chloe and Mark were arrested right there in the lawyer's office. The story exploded. The town's golden girl was revealed to be a conniving, greedy fraud. The community that had shunned us now flocked to us with apologies, their shame a palpable thing. The headlines were brutal. Local tech wonderkins arrested for elder theft. A daughter's betrayal, the Evans family fraud. Their company collapsed overnight. Their assets were frozen. The house on the hill was repossessed by the bank. They faced a long list of felony charges that would likely see them both serving significant prison time. There was no victory dance, no feeling of elation, just a profound, echoing emptiness. We had won. We had gotten our revenge. We had saved our home and my inheritance. But we had lost our daughter. The child I had nursed and loved and cheered for was gone, replaced by a monster of her own making. The grief for that loss was a weight I would carry forever. In the resolution, there is a quiet peace. Robert and I are closer than ever, a bond forged in the fires of betrayal. We tend our garden. We have dinner with friends. We live our lives. The pain is still there, a scar that will never fully fade, but it no longer defines us. I learned that the strength to survive a betrayal isn't about being hard. It's about being flexible, like a willow tree that bends in a storm but doesn't break. It's about finding that core of yourself that no one can ever touch or take from you. My revenge wasn't about hurting her. It was about reclaiming me. If you're listening to this, and you're in the quiet, lonely pain of a betrayal you never saw coming, I want you to hear me. Your feelings are not foolish. Your love was not a weakness. What they did is a reflection of them, not you. Be quiet. Be smart. Gather your strength. Document everything. Find your Arthur Brinkley. And when the time is right, stand up for the person they thought they could destroy. Your best revenge is a life lived fully, peacefully, and well, on your own terms. It won't happen overnight. But I promise you, the sun will rise again. And it will rise on you.